We will begin in 60 seconds.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangatanga maha. Haere mai, nau mai, piki mai, hoki mai ki tēnei hui ngā taumata e pā ana ki te āheinga, me te mana motuhake, mō ngā tāngata whaikaha, me ngā whānau whaikaha Māori. Tēnei rā te miha tiki a koutou tātou, kua hoki nei I rungi te kaupapa matapaki o te wā. Tēnei ka tuku atu nā mihi ki a koutou, haere mai, haere mai, haere mai rā. Ka mutu nei kupu tohu mo tātou, mo tēnei wāhanga. Ma te rongo ka mōhio, ma te mōhio ka marama, ma te marama ka matau, ma te matau ka ora. Tēnā koutou, huri tēnā tātou katoa.
Jonathan Godfrey calling. We're looking to you, Brian, for responding to the mihi.
Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi tuatahi kia koe mātua himi. Kia ora mō tō mihi ki a mātou. Kia ora mō tō whakaro. And kia ora mō tō totoko ki te kaupapa o te rānei. He mihi tuarua ki a koutou katoa. Nā mai hara mai ki te rā. Whakamutunga o tēnei hui. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Hemi. This is Jonathan Godfrey speaking. I'm the current chair for the Independent Monitoring Mechanism, and this is our final session of 4 days of interaction between the IMM and government. This session should last about an hour and a half, and we are going to hear closing remarks from Paula Tesoriero, Brian Coffey, some from other government officials, should they choose, Peter Boshier, and then myself. So without further ado, I invite Paula Tesoriero, Disability Rights Commissioner, to make her closing remarks. Thank you, Paula.
Kia ora, Jonathan, and ngā mihi ki a koe, Hemi, for setting us on the right path again for our final session. E ngā mana, i ngā reo raurangatira mā tēnā koutou katoa, ko Paula Tesoriero, tōku ingoa, ko o te kaihutu, tika hauatanga, mō te kāhui, tika tangata ki Aotearoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you to everyone who has been involved in this forum. Disabled people, tangata whaikaha Māori, whānau hoa, family and whānau, government officials, and my IMM partners. We know that everybody's time is valuable, and we appreciate what you have given over the past week. The IMM wants to thank officials for your effort into preparing responses at what we know is an incredibly busy time. I want to acknowledge you, Brian, and also Sally from the Office of Disability Issues, who helped coordinate the government response. As noted by Brian in an earlier session, the nature of the questions being asked and the information in reply are different than they would have been even a few years ago, which shows some progress. We heard some specific examples of tangata whaikaha and whānau hoa leadership and engagement in the Waikato Enabling Good Lives leadership. We heard about a systemic process for coordination and publication of public service information in alternate formats. We heard about the joint venture business unit having engaged and listened to and woven actions into the strategy for addressing violence and abuse. There is a range of initiatives within the broader justice sector to improve access to communication and other supports, and to build an understanding and responsiveness to the rights and experiences of disabled people. And we've heard about considerable improvements in the collection and disaggregation of disability data, which unfortunately confirms the entrenched inequities. The IMM appreciates the government's acknowledgement of the daily barriers disabled people face, and therefore the considerable work there is to do in Aotearoa. We also appreciate the recognition that progressing the Disability Convention in Aotearoa means upholding Te Tiriti, and that neither can be considered successfully progressing unless and until tangata whaikaha and whānau hoa can live well as Māori. The IMM was therefore pleased to hear the commitment to respond to the submissions and report of the Waitangi Tribunal to the Y2575 Health and Disability Outcomes claim to address rangatiratanga and equity for tangata whaikaha and whānau hoa. But we also need the government to know how discouraging and hurtful many disabled people found in listening to non-specific responses for tangata whaikaha and whānau hoa. There were several references across the 4 days to broad strategies with or without Māori, including a disability lens or vice versa, confirming as indicated in our report that tangata whaikaha whānau hoa, most of whom identify as Māori first, have significant challenges to live this as a reality because strategies don't take an integrated approach. We also heard several times that we are exploring, planning to, or considering. Disabled people have been hearing those words for decades. For example, in response to the first disability strategy in 2001, agencies indicated we will look at our websites and the accessibility of our information, and we will develop an action plan. And similarly, there were references to general strategies such as the Hokai Rangi, which may overall be of benefit to disabled people, but which was not designed by or for disabled people. This is not a criticism of individual officials or agencies, but of systems that rely on individual drivers of change and fail to embed the structural change needed. This is why we need to see the Disability Convention enshrined in our law. In the 14 years since we have ratified the convention, we only have one piece of legislation in Aotearoa that embeds the convention. We can do better. In session 6 on equality and non-discrimination, Article 12, equality before the law, was described as the soul of the Disability Convention. This is not to reduce the convention to matters of law. What it means is that this article is about the fundamental structural change needed to recognise people's cognitive or other impairments have no bearing on a person's legal agency and support to exercise that agency. This means that any law and policy practice flowing from that law that limits disabled people's right to be involved in decisions about their lives is contrary to the Convention and must change. Given the significant proportion of disabled people and children living in households affected by poverty, it was disappointing that there is no work being undertaken to understand the true costs of disability or any specific consideration within general benefit adjustments to use even the current flawed mechanisms of the disability allowance or child disability allowance to meet some of those costs. And the pandemic, as noted at the beginning of our forum, COVID exacerbated the existing inequities, making it urgent to address some of these underlying issues for disabled people. The Ministry of Health indicated during the forum that there was some delay in ensuring tailored responses for disabled people and to act on advice that disabled people have been providing. This could be improved by upholding participation rights. I was so concerned about the situation for disabled people during the Omicron outbreak that, as the Ombudsman noted in his opening remarks, I have used my powers as the Disability Rights Commissioner to launch an inquiry, which I expect to report on in the next couple of weeks. I want to reiterate these remarks are not intended as criticism of individual officials attending and undertaking to provide responses, including to supplementary questions. The IMM hopes that this forum, and in particular the interactions in Part 3, which considered questions submitted by overall observers, will have built an understanding and commitment to advancing the much needed change. For those of you in the busyness who responded solely to the recommendations of the Making Disability Rights Real report or to our specific questions, we urge you to read the report in full so that you are in no doubt as to the need for those recommendations and can implement them consistently with a human rights approach. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, critical to the successful implementation is engagement mechanisms with tangata whaikaha Māori, whānau hoa and disabled people. The questions and responses to our first session show that it is a matter of urgency to establish with tangata whaikaha a mechanism for robust, regular and sustainable leadership and partnering. I will end again in thanks. Thank you in particular to those who observed and submitted questions to the forum. We are pleased that we could put some of those questions to government and hope you found the answers informative. While we are not able to put all of your questions to the government, we have noted them all and we will ask where we can for further answers. We will post those on the Human Rights Commission website where you found links to the information for this forum. The IMM understands that we too have work to do to extend our reach in monitoring the Convention and to ensure that we engage with tangata whaikaha, whānau hoa as te tiriti partners and with a diverse community of disabled people and families. I want to finally thank disabled people in Aotearoa for continuing to advocate for the change so desperately needed. We all must work together to ensure that all disabled people enjoy all rights every single day in every single way. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you everybody for your participation.
Thanks very much, Paula. I'm now going to turn to government for a response. And Brian, I mean no disrespect to anyone in working for government who might theoretically be senior to you in terms of structures within government. But for many disabled people, you are the senior official with respect to their issues. I believe you do deserve pride of place to be given an opportunity to speak in this closing session. And so I invite you to take the floor.
Kia ora, Jonathan. Kia ora, Paula. Kia ora koutou. Look, I'll take the senior aspect of your comments, Jonathan, as meaning the oldest. So I'll
Most
thank
important.
you for that. Look, every morning as I've opened my computer, as we've been part of the forum, coming up on the MSD website is the words mahi tahi. We work together for our communities. And I've got to say that opening the computer and reading those words each day of the forum has created added meaning for those words, because it recognises the need for all of us to work together, the unique roles that we have, the unique roles of the independent monitoring mechanism, the complementary roles that officials have across government in order to progress the convention. I'd like to acknowledge at the start as well the disabled people, tangata whaikaha whānau and allies who have participated online and contributed to the supplementary questions. And also on behalf of the Office for Disabilities and other government officials, I want to acknowledge the IMM partners and the role that you play. In particular, those leaders such as yourself, Dr. Jonathan Godrey, on behalf of the Disabled People's Organisations Coalition, Paula, in your role as the Disability Rights Commissioner, and Judge Peter Boshier as Chief Ombudsman. Thank you for your leadership and stewardship of the process that we've had over the last week and preparation. I also at the same time want to acknowledge the behind the scenes crew. You've acknowledged Sally Jackson. Thank you very much, Sally, for the work that you've done on behalf of officials. Lesia, the project coordinator, kia ora. And I also want to acknowledge your whānau and how you must be feeling at the moment with your whānau in Ukraine and the work that you've done at this time. So to acknowledge you and your whānau. And Josiah, the technology whiz. To my government official colleagues, I think you have demonstrated the essence of being good public servants over the 4 days, and that this is an illustration of the work that you do every day. There were many other officials, apart from those that have appeared at the forum, who have contributed to the work, so we want to acknowledge them. We want to acknowledge that this is alongside of the other important work that you're doing to make a difference for disabled people, tangata whaikaha whānau, hau or Māori whānau and families. Some takeaways for officials. At times, it may have seemed hard listening to the questions and the supplementary questions, but I think overall the comment has got to be, we have valued the opportunity to hear from the IMM on behalf of disabled people and the wider disability community about what is important for them and a reminder for us of the work still to do. Many of the officials will not have met with the IMM before. Many may say we don't want to meet again, but I think overall the comment would be it has been important to hear the voice through the IMM. Prior to the decision by the IMM on the questions that were to be asked at the forum, there were in excess of 35 agencies readied and prepared to participate in the forum if required, depending on the questions asked, and about 70 officials being kept up to date in order to prepare information and respond to questions. So again, the acknowledgement that the forum has had reach as well as depth in terms of its influence. As I said, the questions posed at times have been challenging and have focused on how to make change across the whole system, policies, implementation, practices, services and support. I'm confident that the forum has reminded us of the importance of developing policy approaches alongside disabled people and their representative organisations. I know the questions asked have given officials lots to think about, and I'm sure that they have already influenced change for some organisations. Just as Paula said, there's many questions that have been asked at this forum that may not have been asked in 2014. And at the same time, many answers to those questions that we couldn't have considered in 2014 when New Zealand first appeared before the UNCRPD committee. Furthermore, the answers to the questions cover some of the work that government is doing. I mean, what hasn't been discussed at the forum or touched on lightly are things such as the $7 million funding allocated over 3 years to progress inclusion in sport and recreation. The implementation of the Election Access Fund to support disabled people stand as candidates in parliamentary elections. Waka Kotahi progressing the review of the Total Mobility Scheme, or the recently released Disability Toolkit for Policy, developed to assist policy practitioners across government to explore the disability implications of their policy as they move through the policy process. So just to acknowledge that what is being developed is not just confined to what has been discussed in the forum. The forum has been important, but we can't rely on forums such as this alone as the only means to progress the rights and opportunities for disabled people. The realisation of those rights and opportunities must be embedded in the business as usual of government agencies. Positive takeaways. As officials have responded and talked about the initiatives in response to the questions, my observation is how often they've noted that disabled people have been involved in the development of that work. As Paula noted, we have a much broader set of data about disabled people. And as we said at the outset, sadly, this data often confirms a story that we have expected, that disabled people feature at the bottom of good outcomes in health, employment, education, housing, all the aspects of living a meaningful life that non-disabled people might take for granted. By having data, we now have much greater opportunity to show the reality for disabled people alongside voice mechanisms, and to monitor and show progress, and to understand where further progress needs to be made. We know that tangata whaikaha Māori are doing poorer on almost all measures. A major area of opportunity moving ahead has got to be the meaningful engagement of tangata whaikaha whānau hoa in a genuine, authentic way to achieve better lives and outcomes. The government looks forward to progressing this work, building on the emerging knowledge that tangata whaikaha have given us in the various initiatives such as Enabling Good Lives, and the commitment to a tripartite relationship for the government that is both treaty-based as well as UNCRPD-based. As Minister Cepoloni said, the implementation of the new ministry is promising. The foundations of partnership will be laid, but it needs to be robust and sustainable. And so we all need to work together to build it carefully. This forum has come at an exciting time of change for disabled people, tangata whaikaha whānau hoa, families and whānau, as the work on transforming the disability system becomes a reality. The forum is a first and has been a great way for both the IMM and government to listen and share ideas, progress questions and opportunities. Once again, on behalf of government agencies, thank you again to everyone who has contributed to everyone who has made this forum a success. It has been hard work, but it has been worthwhile. This forum has been a way to show not only what we have done and what we are doing together, but what opportunities there are still ahead as we continue to work together. We are looking forward to sharing with the UN Committee the progress that the government has made and look forward to future opportunities. Kia ora, ngā mihi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you very much, Brian. We're now going to have an opportunity for other officials to offer some thoughts. Brian, I'm going to get you to, in the spirit of partnership, to help direct traffic. I'm looking for you to tell us in particular which officials need to be given time and the prioritisation, please.
Kia ora. Jonathan, there's a number of people that will want to speak, but to kick us off, I'm going to call on Ben O'Meara.
Thank you, Ben. Go ahead.
Kia ora, Brian. Kia ora koutou. I think you'd asked us to focus on a couple of things, Jonathan, in this session. One was what actions could we commit to progress out of these sessions, and also what do we need a renewed commitment to. The thing that I take out of this as particularly important is a focus on continuing to build our data sets. So notwithstanding the progress that we've seen through these sessions with the release of the information from the Office of Disability Issues, we still don't know enough about disabled students in the education system, and I guess the identification of their needs and how they are going as disabled people within the system. And so we take from this an ongoing commitment and an action to continue that work in terms of the data sets that we build and the intersection of data sets that will really enable us to assess the progress and outcomes for disabled people.
Kia ora, thanks, Ben. Fiona, I know you gathered some thoughts from others, so would you like to make a comment?
Kia ora, Brian. It's Fiona Carter-Giddings here from Ministry of Social Development. I led the session on poverty last week for the government response, and just had collected a few thoughts from others who attended in terms of the questions that you posed to us. So I thought I'd just run through those thoughts. So you posed about 3 questions. So just to run through those. Firstly, for us, the forum's really highlighted the need for action on keeping the needs of disabled people and their whānau at the forefront of policymakers' minds. And as Brian was talking earlier, it was a good reminder, the disability toolkit for policymakers that he referred to is a really very helpful resource for this. So we'll look to draw on that heavily. And then in a similar vein, the forum's highlighted the need for our continued commitment to ensuring that as policy is developed and as ministers make decisions, that we as policymakers listen to the voices of those with the lived experience to contribute to that. And also the thing I think particularly for me that I was struck with during our session was just making sure that we ensure there's a broad awareness of the Enabling Good Lives principles so that policymakers can take them into account as part of the policy development process. And then the final reflection from the group that I was involved with is that we found it really useful to bring together several agencies to the session itself and to go through the process of addressing the questions that you asked us, as we're very aware that addressing poverty and the needs of disabled people is something that requires the attention of multiple agencies across many policy and operational areas. So we thought it was usefully illustrative of that. So kia ora rā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Fiona. I'll call on Julia and then Anthony after that, and then health colleagues.
Kia ora, Brian. Julia Bergman speaking. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So the IMM Forum has demonstrated how far we've come in creating opportunities for disabled people to achieve their goals and aspirations. And as the General Manager for Disability Policy here at MSD, I've had the privilege to see how much progress has been made, such as the announcement on the establishing the new Ministry for Disabled People and the legislation to strive to make Aotearoa more accessible. I've witnessed partnerships between the disability community, tangata whaikaha Māori and whānau whaikaha Māori, and been fortunate enough to be involved in many of those. At the same time, I know that the challenges remain and we have so much more to do. And the IMM Forum reiterated some of the things we can do more and do better. So in that regard, I wanted to share sort of 3 key takeaways and commitments from my perspective on this forum. So for starters, I was reminded of what the disability community told us when we were developing the policy proposals for the new ministry, and they kept encouraging us to be more aspirational. So the message was clearly repeated throughout these 4 days as well in conversations and remarks shared by observers. And it's a good reminder to us all as government agencies to continue to ensure our advice is aspirational so that we can achieve better outcomes. The second area that struck me was new partnerships can be created and those that exist can be further strengthened and extended. So in reflecting on our work related to accessibility, we worked in partnership with the Access Alliance and engaged with a range of partners and stakeholders. We reached out to experts, policymakers, advocates, business leaders, whānau, and their participation allowed us to account for different situations and considerations. This is one example, but we know we can always do more. And we know we have to create more mechanisms for voice. And we absolutely have to do more with respect to tripartite relationships. So this means working in close partnership with the disability community, particularly with tangata whaikaha Māori, which we've heard so much about, whānau whaikaha Māori and iwi from the very beginning of these processes. And then my final reflection and commitment as government, we can do more to maximise the impact of our efforts for disabled people. And this forum in particular has struck how much more we can explore to better coordinate our different work programs and proactively look for opportunities to collaborate. This forum has provided us all with a fantastic opportunity to come together and hear how hear reflections on the convention through people's work. I've found that really useful and I really look forward to seeing how we can create more opportunities to come together and align this work. And finally, just wanted to thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum. I appreciated hearing the diverse views and I look forward to continuing to work together. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Anthony, and if other officials want to put their hand up on screen after Anthony so that I can call on you. Anthony.
Cool. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anthony Frith aho. So greetings everyone, I'm Anthony Frith, I'm Manager Communications for the National Emergency Management Agency, Te Rako Whakamaru, and it's been a real privilege to be involved in this forum. From an emergency management standpoint and off the back of emergency after emergency after emergency in recent years, this forum has really highlighted the need for continued commitment to learning and improving our equity and access arrangements for disabled people during peacetime, rather than scrambling to do so during and immediately after emergencies. Emergencies are, of course, incredibly valuable ways to identify equity and access issues for disabled people, but the problem with that as well, though, is the problem with using emergencies as steep learning curves is that the lessons we keep learning is usually stuff that disabled people have been telling us all along. So like Brian said, we need to actually embed this into our BAU. Looking ahead, I think we need to commit to ensuring that the lessons of the many emergencies Aotearoa has endured are seized upon, and that future lessons are actually anticipated and averted, and that these lessons are shared across the public service so that lessons aren't kept to our departmental silos. I'm sure we've got a heck of a lot to learn from each other. I think we need an integrated approach to working alongside disabled people to design tangible and practical improvements to our emergency arrangements that do reduce inequity and access. And we need to advance a strength-based approach to emergency management that really does harness the strengths that disabled people bring to our communities. Finally, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I've learnt a lot, and I've been sharing a lot of that back with my agency, and I really look forward to the change that I think it will be a catalyst for. Ngāhi mihi nui.
Kia ora, Anthony. Jonathan, just to say we've got 5 people that are going to speak, so that is probably the most that we can do. Would that be right, Jonathan? At this stage,
Right.
in terms of timing? Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
Given the time each person's taken so far, you can probably squeeze in 6 or 7. So don't kill anyone off too early.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
Tēnā koutou rau rangatira mā, ko Anita Ryan tuku ingoa, he kai whakahaere mātua rōpū hauora I Arapautama tuku tūranga mahi. My name is Juanita Ryan and I head up the health services for the Department of Corrections. Firstly, I also wanted just to acknowledge the IMM, that the gracious approach that you have taken to asking the questions that you've asked of the officials. The gracious approach that you've taken, I think at times when you've felt understandably frustrated with the progress or the limited progress on a number of issues so important to you all. I want to thank you, Paula, for opening and for the constructive, thoughtful and respectful feedback that you summarised at the beginning of the session today as a challenge and an opportunity for us to determine how we can go faster and harder on some of these key issues across the state sector, and really appreciate the challenge for us to move past exploring and considering and investigating and being able to come back in the next opportunity with more definitive outcomes and actions. So that is probably one of the key things, just your summing up in terms of something for me to take away back to my own department and the Department of Corrections. But the other thing that the forum highlighted for me on behalf of Arapautama was our need within corrections to double down on the efforts to work alongside disabled people to raise awareness of the needs of those people within sentences with us, and particularly in a prison context, and how we best design facilities, we train our staff, and we equip them appropriate to support people in a custodial context. As I said, I think on the first day of the forum, we are developing a disability action plan currently, and the forum has certainly provided me with, and the other officials present from our agency, with further thoughts about what we must do to strengthen that and ensure that we develop that in a collaborative and considered way, both with the voices of disabled people within our prisons as a key part of it, as well as a wider disabled community. I think in terms of what we're going to continue to commit to, it's very clear from me that the way that the questions were asked about the importance of us continuing to strengthen our approach to working across the sector to address issues in a joined up way, and that it's absolutely going to take an all of government effort to deliver on the IMM recommendations and outcome for disabled people. And in fact, even with the government, that we should not expect to be doing this alone without engaging with the NGO and other critical community groups. So that this is genuinely a collaborative effort. But just thank you once again. It's been an honour and a humbling experience to be here, and Corrections is genuinely motivated to determine how we would best strengthen our relationship with the IMM to improve the outcomes for people within our context from this point onwards. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Juanita, calling on Dr. John Crawshaw. John, your microphone's not on yet.
Kia ora, I'm John Crawshaw. I'm the Director of Mental Health and Addiction at the Ministry of Health. And Brian, I think Godrey was also going to make some comments. The forum certainly affirmed our focus on ensuring greater consistency with our human rights obligations across the important areas of work within the mental health and addiction space, including the reducing and eliminating seclusion and repealing and replacing the Mental Health Act. We acknowledge that there are unacceptable inequities existing, particularly for tangata whaikaha kahaha Māori. The questions from the IMM and the disabled community underscored the importance of hearing the voices of the community about issues that are important to them, including reducing and eliminating seclusion and other restrictive practices, reforming our mental health legislation, and giving people a greater say in the mental health support they need. We remain committed to seeking the views of the disabled community, including tangata whaikaha Māori. This was reflected in our approach to the public consultation for the repeal and replacement of the Mental Health Act, where we provided safe places for disabled people with lived experience to share their views. We will continue to ensure that the voices of disabled people remain central to this work. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum.
Kia ora. Thanks, John. Paula from the Tertiary Education Commission.
Tēnā koutou o ku rangatira. Ka mihi kia koutou hear me, Brian, Jonathan, me koe Paula nau, nā koutou tēnei wāhanga o te hui I arahi. Paula here, I'm one of the Deputy Chief Executives at the Tertiary Education Commission, the Deputy Chief Executive for Ōrītitanga, Learner Success, and in essence, Equity. Alongside our sister agencies online, we have been particularly humbled to have the privilege of having officers in all of the sessions during the time of the forum, and also want to join steal Juanita's language and recognise the grace and compassion that you have shown to us as officials, and hopefully that we will repay in our work beyond the forum. The forum's highlighted need for action in a number of areas that colleagues have touched on, and we are part of the education fleet alongside Ben and our colleagues from the ministry and the other major agencies in the education system. We are the tertiary funder, so I do want to touch particularly on that, but to also recognise that we have heard the need for action on removing barriers and the data to understand how to remove those barriers, representation, agency, voice and transparency. And particular, we have heard, we will take from this that we need to make sure that our relationships with the likes of the National Disabled Students Association and other disability stakeholder leaders and partners are strongly heard in our system, and their agency is real in our system. I would normally finish with Te Tiriti, but I'm going to finish with funding. On Te Tiriti, both personally and as an agency, we heard the need for urgent action on, we have treaty frameworks, we have treaty models, but our treaty frameworks and models need to be specific to the needs of tangata whaikaha Māori, and we have heard that message very, very powerfully. But perhaps the message that we most powerfully heard as an operational funding agency was the need for action and the need for and the frustration at non-specific responses. So I want to touch on what an important innovation in our system that would have been I know was raised in the education part of the forum. We have introduced a condition of funding for tertiary providers that they have to submit to us a disability action plan. It is a relatively new funding requirement for the tertiary education system, but a hugely important one for us. And it is part of a learner success plan requirement for tertiary providers. Those plans, our commissioners have drawn a line in the sand and said, alongside achieving system parity for Māori learners, Pacific learners, low-income whānau, that the plans need to demonstrate a clear pathway towards system-level parity for disabled learners. And in the spirit of specific responses, tertiary providers have been told that if we do not have confidence in those plans, then they should not expect any funding increases from us, but also the converse, that we know the challenge will not be resolved in a short period of time. So, and the mountain is big. So if we are confident, and our confidence will need to reflect the confidence of our stakeholders, then we will be supportive of funding for tertiary providers. So just wanted to reinforce that we have heard those messages loudly and strongly, and grateful for the opportunity that this forum will create for us in terms of future work.
Kia ora, Paula. So I've got Audrey, Claudia, and then Ursula. And Jonathan has just posted to me, well, not wanting to reduce the manner of your contribution. He's looking at 1:55 as the time for us to move on to the next part of this closing session. So kia ora, Audrey, handing to you.
Kia ora koutou. Audrey is Bista, Deputy Director General of Disability in the Ministry of Health. On behalf of the Ministry of Health, I would like to thank the IMM for the opportunity to participate in this process. First time for me, but in particular, I want to thank all the individuals, tangata whaikaha, disabled people, the people that have contributed to these sessions. It has been a very, very enlightening experience. The current pandemic has brought the rights of disabled people into sharp focus as they experience disadvantage throughout the pandemic. The lessons that we have learned from our COVID response and the issues discussed in this forum will be great and useful preparation for the UN committee examination later in the year. While the timing of this forum has been challenging for us, it has also provided us at the Ministry an opportunity to take pause in the time of significant pressure to reflect on the issues across a wide span of the Ministry's work as they relate to the fundamental human rights of disabled people. It has also been really encouraging to reflect on the progress that we're making, but very sobering to recognise the scale of the work that still needs to be done. For the Disability Directorate in the Ministry of Health, the forum has highlighted in particular the need for a renewed focus on bodily integrity of disabled people, particularly in relation to issues such as involuntary sterilisation. The session yesterday morning clearly reiterated to us the importance and urgency of this issue and the need to accelerate the process. All the sessions that we have participated in have also emphasised the need for continued commitment to partnership with disabled people, tangata whaikaha, working across all the work that we do. This is particularly important as a reflection for us in the Disability Directorate as we move towards the establishment of the new Ministry for Disabled People, as well as the new health system entities on the 1st of July of this year. This partnership with disabled people and tangata whaikaha needs continued emphasis in both the health and disability system reforms, and we remain committed to working with our community partners. This involves leadership as well as partnership, leadership of disabled people and tangata whaikaha. The issues highlighted by the forum will help us shape the work programme in both the reformed health system and the new Ministry for Disabled People. Thank you once again. It has been a personal and very, not only challenging, but enlightening situation for me to be in. Thank you.
Kia ora, Audrey. Handing to you, Claudia.
Thank you for the opportunity to sum up, I think, on the part of Oranga Tamariki. This forum has highlighted the need for action for us on ensuring better data and accuracy of information, not just for us, but right across government, particularly on disabled children and their families. The forum has highlighted the need for a continued commitment from Oranga Tamariki to stay the course, aligning our work with Te Ao Māori, embedding the social and rights-based model of disability, focusing on Pacific Māori and disabled tamariki, rangatahi and whānau hoa to get care and protection right for them. And finally, my reflections on the forum. Overall, the team has found it to be a really interesting experience. It has been really great to hear about the other projects and programs going on across different agencies and to see the potential for aligning our work programs and really leaning in together. We're not going to solve these problems by ourselves. So really working together to improve our impact. I have to say that at times, the team working with me, some of us are feeling the intersection between our lived experiences and our roles as officials. And we're feeling the privilege, but it's also led to some really interesting discussions kind of behind the scenes, being really excited and interested in holding government to account, but at the same time working for government. So we've really appreciated the experience. So thank you very much.
Kia ora, thanks, Claudia. And Ursula.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Ursula tuku ingoa. I am speaking for the Ministry of Justice, which was the lead agency for the discrimination and equality session. For us, this was a really good opportunity to do a stock take across government of what is happening, the gaps, and most importantly, to better understand what is important to disabled people. So therefore, I would like to thank all the organizers and participants for the time and the questions. It was also for the Ministry of Justice a valuable opportunity to reflect ahead of the upcoming UN examination later this year. The big takeout was how the forum highlighted the need for greater engagement with and the involvement of the disability community in the justice, operational and policy space, and the need to carefully think about how to go about this engagement. It's clear, based on what we've just heard, that strengthening community engagement is a focus across government and certainly something the Ministry of Justice is committed to. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Ursula. Jonathan, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Brian. And I'm going to thank officials in my closing remarks, but I'm not dismissing you and moving on to Peter Boshier, the Chief Ombudsman, straight away. Peter.
Kia ora, Jonathan, and kia ora mā tātou katoa. I'd like to start, please, with this karakia. Mai I te tuhu arangi, ki te tuhu anuku. Te ahu mai I roto, marama mai I roto. Tūpū mauri ora, ki te whaiao, ki te ao marama, hui e taiki e. From the signs of the Sky Father above to the movements of Mother Earth below, radiating from within, shining from within, to foster everlasting life, to follow and pursue the world of light, draw together, be unified in purpose. So Jonathan, thank you for your introduction. And what I thought I would do to officials is to recognize you, but to make some points in response, which I hope you find helpful. First of all, to you, Julia Bergman. I think for officials who are undertaking policy and advising on legislation, to turn one's mind to disability and the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities should be as natural as the BORA analysis test. That is, the Bill of Rights. Does it comply with the Bill of Rights? I'd like to see us in a situation where policy advisors think naturally like the light follows the day on whether what's being put forward addresses those who have disabilities. The second thing to you, Juanita Ryan from Corrections, And I'm pleased that Corrections is genuinely motivated to better accommodate those who have disabilities. In a number of our reports, we've found that Corrections has not been user-friendly when it comes to those with disabilities entering the corrections system. And one of the reasons that I've launched a systemic investigation is to see how better we can get traction with Corrections in making improvements. And Juanita, if you can feed into that systemic report, which will be concluded at the beginning of next year, to entrench the rights of those with disabilities, that would be fantastic. Thirdly, to you, John Crawshaw, I'm so pleased to hear what you've said about the commitment to reducing the incidence of seclusion of those who have disabilities. In October last year, I wrote a report in relation to a facility at Homeo Tiki Tiki, and this is what I said. He likened the man's case to that of autistic and intellectually disabled man Ashley Peacock, who spent years living in a seclusion room at the Tāwhiri Mātia unit. It's not often that I go as far as saying that treatment amounts to being cruel and inhuman. That's really because client A has been secluded for such an unacceptably long time. And just recently, I released a report on Ward 10A, Waikari at Dunedin Hospital, and I was sharply critical of the facilities for those who have disabilities and my repeat recommendations that those be improved. So we here at this forum will actually look to see for action. Lastly, to you, Claudia Boyles and Oranga Tamariki, thank you for what you've said. In my report, Hitaki Ko Huki Huki, again I signalled that one of the mistakes that Oranga Tamariki had made when uplifting Pepe was to fail to have regard to parents who had disabilities. And in fact, I went as far, and I don't often do this, in saying it was a breach of the convention. I think the response of Oranga Tamariki has been gratifying, Claudia, and I hope that the improvement, which is clearly occurring, will go forward entrenching a natural way of operating with Oranga Tamariki to accommodate parents, many of whom have disabilities. So those were my comments, just in reply to officials who have given us very good statements of their intentions. Getting on to this forum, I'd like to acknowledge the immense amount of work that's gone into administering the forum, and I must do that. It's not been done by me, but others, and my team has had some input. The pinnacle of this forum's success was that disabled people led the forum and engaged directly with government. I'd like to recognise particularly my IMM colleagues, Paula Tesoriero and Dr. Jonathan Godrey, who took turns skillfully chairing all of the forum sessions. I believe that Paula and Jonathan's leadership helped to facilitate respectful and engaging dialogue with government. As I've said in my opening address, working collaboratively is extremely important to ensure disabled people can live a good life here in Aotearoa. Disabled people were truly at the forefront of this forum. Engagement from civil society was necessary to ensure the forum's success. So to all of the disabled people who took the time to ask the government questions, I thank you for your time and your dedication. You've played an important part in ensuring disabled people's voices have been heard. Your voices must continue to be heard on all issues and on all stages. Brian Coffey, I'd like to single you out. I'd like to thank you for your closing remarks. You've played such an important role in ensuring that the government effectively contributed to this forum. 3 points quickly, Brian, from what you said. First of all, your expression mahitanga, working together. That's a strong theme that's emerged. And if we can achieve it in reality, then, Brian, we would have achieved much. The second is the reach that you indicated had been achieved with 35 agencies and 70 officials. The reach and depth that you talked about, you said was quite unique. And I'm really pleased about that. If we have been slightly provocative, then I think that has been a move in the right direction. Thirdly, Brian, of you personally, you carry out your role with dignified, measured humanity, but when required, you can bare your teeth. If something needs speaking out about, you're prepared to do it. Thank you for everything that you do and the leadership that you provide. Now, despite the ongoing challenges that COVID-19 represents, this forum effectively engaged many disabled people and civil society in safe, accessible ways. Although the marvels of technology made this forum possible, we must not forget those who are impacted by the digital divide. I wish to acknowledge the many disabled people's organisations, and other advocates who took measures to ensure disabled people could effectively participate in this forum. And so to conclude, the output of this forum is an important next step in fulfilling the IMM's monitoring obligation under the Disability Convention. The conclusions of the National Forum will be covered in a new IMM report. This will be presented to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to inform our country's examination later this year. It's been almost 8 years since New Zealand's disability rights record was reviewed by the Disability Committee, and we're keen to ensure that the committee has access to relevant and up-to-date information. Thank you again for helping to ensure that we as an IMM were able to glean this information by working collaboratively with disabled people in Aotearoa. Forthcoming report will highlight the input from disabled people and wider civil society that's helped shape the forum. We're entering a period of change in the lives of disabled New Zealanders. For instance, the proposed accessibility legislation and the imminent establishment of a Ministry for Disabled People have the potential to advance the rights of disabled New Zealanders and to remove barriers that have persisted for too long. We must ensure that disabled people are able to make key decisions relating to these important milestones. Finally, I thank you again for your interest and participation in the forum. And look, I'm proud to think that so many disabled voices have played their part in considering whether we are, and I quote, making disability rights real in Aotearoa. I promise that your voices will be echoed in the IMM's upcoming report. Me pēnei he kōrero whakamutu nā māku. Unu hia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara tangata. Koe rā e rongo, whakaeria aki ki rongo. Ta tina hui e, tae ki e. Draw on the supreme sacredness. To free the heart, the body and the spirit of mankind. Rongo suspended high above us. Draw together, affirm. Nō re rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you very much, Peter. In listening to today's session, I've had to add some small comments to my already prepared notes, and I'm already going to slap myself for having too many. First of all, I'm going to start by offering up the thank yous. You've already heard that a lot of people have put effort into this, but without naming everyone, because I can't rattle off so many names in the allotted time, there has been a project team that have worked together very hard over the last 6 weeks to get us to where we are. Behind that project team is the wider IMM team, supporting where we can and picking up little jobs every now and again. To the disabled people who gave of themselves dating back as far as the hui and the survey that contributed to the original Making Disability Rights Real reports. A thank you. Thank you to the disabled people who took the time to listen and to make their contributions known during this forum. Thank you to the disabled people who took a role, an active role, a front-facing role, I think we've called it from time to time, in this forum. Thank you for giving of yourselves. There have been a number of behind-the-scenes people, the tech support guys, thank you. Josiah and your colleagues from Streamliner, thank you very much. I think we've managed to avoid most major problems that I've ever observed in online forums like this. To NZSL, the iSign team, to name you in particular, Alan, Scott, Angela and Rachel, thank you very much for your time. You never get to introduce yourselves, but you are a critical component of making the forum work for deaf people, both as participants and in the audience. We have had captioning going the entire time, thanks to Red B. But in reflecting on all those thank yous, perhaps we had the easy jobs. We knew what we were in for. We knew our roles, and in some way we determined them. So I now have to turn to the officials and say thank you for your efforts. Most of you didn't know what you were in for more than 6 weeks ago. On the whole, you have delivered. That doesn't mean that disabled people will like what they heard, and the IMM must reflect on that in formulating our report to the UN. In reflecting on the comments that I've heard today, if only the commitments that we heard during this closing session come to pass, then the forum was a success. But there are so many other commitments in behind what was said today that we didn't get to hear about. I thank you for your closing comments as a sample of what others may have been able to share with us. So it comes now for me to summarize. And in closing and writing my speech notes, I'm offering personal reflections, and I must reiterate some things in order to give voice to the disabled people that the IMM serves. And I have to also include the wider context, where we are in the world today. So now I'll turn to my actual notes. Our government is elected to govern in the best interests of all of us. This forum has asked if successive governments have done this for us. There is a balance of responsibility required to ensure that actions are not further disadvantaging disabled people. And in starting, I'm conscious that every time that government suggests what disabled people need to do, we must ask collectively, I mean, if that is government empowering disabled people or government shirking its responsibility and shifting the burden onto already overburdened disabled people. For example, would government dare to tell Māori that their rights under the treaty can be a discussion at select committee? I think not. But that's what's being done to disabled people this year. And in the context of the experiences of disabled people, going to select committee is progress. The issues facing disabled Kiwis are topical. We're in a pandemic. They are being talked about. No one should forget the horrors of the past for disabled people, but we must move forwards. We must move forwards if we are to avoid the same outcomes affecting the next generation of disabled people. This forum heard officials acknowledge there are things that are wrong for disabled people. We all need to acknowledge the wrongs and move on to what is right. We are making progress. Disabled people are better off in absolute terms. I suspect very few of us would want to go back to 2008 when we ratified the convention, let alone the 20th century, when the first New Zealand disability strategy was born. But even so, disabled people do not have parity. Disabled people do not have equity. And that is being felt by their whānau and families too. The government has presented evidence to show us that there is plenty of action being taken. This action will improve the lives of disabled people. We must acknowledge the work as progress. But I ask you, while this work is necessary, is it sufficient? Hold that thought. The work needs to be valued, even if it is not enough. Life for many disabled people might be better than it was, but that doesn't mean it is easier or as easy as it should be if we have parity with non-disabled people. We do not know if we are better off in relative terms. And so I'm left asking, is the gap between disabled and non-disabled people closing or widening? Government has not shown us which way things are tracking because this data and evidence does not currently exist. Disabled people know that we do not have parity. In 2022, equity for disabled people would look like a determined effort to help move us towards parity. And if not in 2022, then in 2023 and 2024 and every year until we do have parity. We, and in this instance, I actually think I mean New Zealand, needs an absolute commitment from every agency and every government minister that effort will be put into determining which way we are tracking. This would be a start on ensuring equity for disabled people. I've said it and I'll keep saying it. New Zealand has made progress in collecting data and evidence on the outcomes for disabled people. We've heard a lot of that over this forum. We can get a lot of the data we need right now. And for those people who don't know, I'm a statistician in my day job. I understand what can be done with data, and I understand what many of the limitations we are facing right now are. New Zealand can get the data and evidence that we all need, but the resource to do this job is quite limited. My professional assessment is that the tools to provide considerably more data on the outcomes for disabled people do exist. For example, turning to tangata whaikaha Māori in particular, we can link the outcomes from Te Kupenga with the last census so that we can obtain more data and evidence specific to tangata whaikaha Māori. We've seen that with the evidence presented and reminded to us all about the vaccine rollout in particular. But the workforce required to undertake all the work collecting the data and evidence does not currently exist. We have a collective shortage of capacity and capability because we have insufficient numbers of people with the analytic skills required to use the existing tools and we haven't got a real way forward to solve that problem. I'd also reflect that we have far too many disabled people spending far too much energy worrying about how statisticians and analysts measure the disability equity gap. If there's an equity gap, stop worrying. It is evidence that work is required. Sometime down the track, when we find that there is no equity gap, then let's start worrying about who is being overlooked. And to be honest, who is being overlooked in data collections right now isn't exactly one of our major problems. The Washington Group short set of questions was used in the last census, but they are not about us as individuals. They are not about how and who should be receiving services. They're only good as the best tools for gathering statistics, and that's all they're good for. Disabled people are not statistics. We are people. Now, putting that on the table, I'm going to turn around and say, but data is not enough. We are not extracting full benefit from the data we already have, let alone any more data that we might obtain. When we do have data, we have an obligation to use it. Disabled people need to see how all government agencies are planning to close the identified equity gaps. Those were gaps identified by government and highlighted by the IMM. Disabled people need to work out how they will help agencies. We need an absolute commitment from every agency and every government minister that effort will be put into closing equity gaps. And we need to know that disabled people are going to have an integral part to play in closing those gaps. To close or to understand the equity gaps, agencies must understand the difference between disabled and non-disabled people. Government will need help to do this. Agencies could do this by employing more disabled people to normalise the needs of disabled people in their organisational cultures, their planning, and their service delivery. This will help, but it is not enough. Agencies must ensure that meeting the needs of disabled people truly becomes a business as usual transaction. agencies must understand disabled people. And that requires a fundamental shift in thinking in many agencies. I'm going to single out the National Emergency Management Authority in this instance, agency, sorry. The organisational culture clearly includes disabled people as business as usual already. Now, I accept that they want to do more. But when the next flood happens, NEMA and the activities on the ground will be judged by how many disabled people get left in the water. So they're already thinking about disabled people as part of their natural job. I suspect that's because they don't look at disabled people as a special project. And that's because they're looking at the diverse needs of the entire population. Business as usual does not mean treating disabled people the same as non-disabled people. That's what we were doing in the past. The status quo is what disables people. I'll repeat that. The status quo is disabling people. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So agencies must do things differently. Government ministers must be held to account for holding their agencies to account. We must look for the levers that force action that is in favour of disabled people to reduce the disabling caused by government doing what they've always done. The IMM has had to make choices on what topics we tackled in this forum. It's certainly encouraging that the IMM didn't need to raise every topic critical to disabled people. We heard government mention such major topics as the digital divide. There are some really big issues that seriously impact on decisions disabled people and their families are making today. The feedback the IMM has received includes the inequities arising by the way we receive support, ACC versus not ACC, is an example. The harsh reality is that some people think it would be better to have had a nasty accident rather than be born with impairments. And the vexed issue of relationship status affecting disabled people. Why should my partner be financially responsible when my parents weren't? The list of other issues that we haven't touched upon is long. Through its reports, I have to reflect that the IMM is not convinced that government officials, on the whole, are sufficiently aware of the impact these and other policies are having on the desire of disabled people to live a good life. Our questions over the last week were often aimed at the equity gaps that exist, and often the government response did acknowledge the equity gap being highlighted. Other answers were less forthcoming in terms of the recognition that a problem exists for disabled people. So I say to all agencies, from the chief executives down, and your ministers, If agencies do not work with disabled people and their representative organisations, you will continue to do what you've always done. When agencies did tell this forum that they had worked with disabled people, their efforts, telling us about what they had done and their efforts for what was done for disabled people showed a real partnership approach. I could express the frustration felt by disabled people when that doesn't happen with a couple of phrases. If you're not working with us, you're working against us. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. These are the natural frustrations of disabled people. So I'm going to paraphrase the last one and say, if you're not working to close the equity gaps for disabled people, you're probably helping sustain them. There is too much happening already for the disabled people already making themselves available. There's too much work already for those people to be able to respond. And more work is quite clearly coming. So thank you for acknowledging that. The expectation of the IMM is that the government has a responsibility to listen to disabled people. Yes, the IMM must do so from time to time as well, but that's because it's our job in monitoring. Our monitoring work and our interactions with government calls for greater engagement with disabled people. As a personal observation, I see too many people in society, not just disabled people, complaining about what other people are not doing. I see plenty of disabled people thinking that their concerns aren't being addressed because they aren't at the table. I've even recently seen disabled people being critical of other disabled people. We need to acknowledge what people are doing. We need to believe that anyone takes on a role to represent others is giving it their all. So I thank the numerous disabled people and their whānau and family members who are giving it their best. There is so much work that needs to be done, and disabled people and their whānau need to be involved. But we can't be involved in everything. Anyone who wants to work with and for other disabled people can do so by getting involved with the DPO. Any disabled person who wants to go it alone can do so, but I suspect that that's the hard way. In my time working with government officials, I see them respond much more willingly if I tell them that what they are doing or proposing is good, but that they can do better. Officials do not have all the answers. That's why they come to DPOs. Government officials love it when disabled people give them hope that answers exist and offer them ideas that they can progress. Government officials value cooperation. After all, everyone responds to positive encouragement. People do not need to feel beaten up or bashed around if they're giving it their best. And I thank everyone who is giving it their best. While there is not room at every table for every disabled person and every one of their family members, There's a lot of tables already to sit at for sharing your views, and there are going to be more tables to sit at in the very near future. We have to somehow increase the level of trust and confidence that whoever is at each table is doing their best. We have to accept, though, that in total, the grand sum of everything that everyone is doing, while it might be their best, isn't enough. We need more people getting involved and doing their best. We have hundreds of thousands of disabled people waiting for change today. They want parity. They won't ever get parity until such time as we all use equity as the basis for our decision making. We have the data. New Zealand's disabled people have an appetite for change, and we need to see that mirrored by government at all levels. On behalf of disabled people, I close by saying, we want to see parity. We need to see equity. And on behalf of the IMM, I close by saying, the purpose of the UN Convention is to attain parity for disabled people. The rights of disabled people need to be the same as for non-disabled people in actions and outcomes, not just words. We have to demand to see effort being made to close the disability equity gaps. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. We can't do the best thing. We can act now. Thank you.
Jonathan, ko hemi tēnei. Anei nā mihi mai oha kia koe, kia koutou katoa e raurangatira mā, e whakaihu waka I runga I tēnei mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mihi ana ki ngā kai whakamāori, mō nā mahi I te rānei, tēnā hoki rā kōrua. Hoi anō ka whakarewa ngā kōrero o tēnei wānanga ki runga, kia whakaroaro ki nā kaupapa ko puta mai. Nō reira, ka mutsu I roto I te kupu karakia, ke ino I tātou. Kia tauterangi Māori e ki rungia tātou katoa. Ruia, 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 ruia ki runga, ruia ki raro. Ruia ki waho, ruia ki roto. Ruia ki uta, ruia ki tai. Hu ana ki te rangi, turu ana ki nuku, nā kua tau, kua mau, kua ea, tihewa, mauri ora. Kia ora tātou katoa.